On a February night in northern Arizona, the town feels folded in on itself. Pine trees bend under the weight of wind. Rain clicks against tin roofs, and most porch lights have already gone dark. Up on one flat rooftop, a single security camera is still awake. Its lens stares out over a small greenhouse made of old glass panels. Normally, it records nothing more dramatic than drifting snow or a passing crow, but tonight, the motion alert goes off, and the camera captures something no one on that quiet street expects. At first, it's just a blur. A shadow spills across the glass, slides, scrambles. Tiny paws slip on the wet surface. A tail flickers into frame, ringed with dark bands. The camera's night mode washes everything in soft gray. You can almost hear the little claws skitter across the surface. Tap, tap, tap. Like a nervous drummer, the shape stops. Ears perk. A small bobcat kitten, soaked from the storm, presses her belly to the glass. One back leg doesn't sit quite right. She's trying to decide whether this rooftop is dangerous or a stage. Then she does it. She looks straight up into the lens, squints against the rain, and pulls her mouth back in that strange, crooked way that bobcats sometimes do. But on camera, in the glow of a phone screen later that week, it looks exactly like a wild kitten giving the world a mischievous grin. This is the moment people will share, over coffee in the morning and late at night in bed. A tiny rescued bobcat kitten, dancing on a rooftop greenhouse like it's her own little theater, wearing a smile that dares you not to laugh. But right now, in real time, there is no caption, no comments. Just a man named Caleb standing downstairs in his dark kitchen, staring at the alert on his tablet. He taps the screen. The clip plays. The bobcat slides, scrambles, stomps both front paws on the glass at once as if protesting the weather, then tilts her head and shows that goofy expression again. The sound, if you listen close, is simple. Claws on glass, rain on metal, his own quiet breath catching in his throat. He doesn't laugh yet. He just watches. The camera was meant for security. For a long time, it has only recorded an empty roof above a greenhouse that no one visits anymore. Tonight, without asking for permission, it begins recording something else. A meeting between a wild animal and a life that has been stuck in pause for too long. A few days from now, that clip will be trimmed, gently brightened, and passed from one person to another. It will leave this little mountain town and show up on screens in living rooms, break rooms, and hospital waiting areas across the country. People will see the bobcat kitten stomping and smiling on that glass roof, and they'll feel something unclench inside them for just a moment. They'll text a friend, "You have to see this little rooftop bobcat. She really thinks she's on stage." Some will chuckle, some will replay it, not quite sure why it feels so comforting. They'll be told, in one form or another, try not to laugh at her silly smile. And most of them will fail in the best way. What they won't see in that short viral clip is what's under the glass. They won't see the row of empty planters in the greenhouse, the one dead plant still sitting in a chipped ceramic mug. They won't see how many months it has been since Caleb opened that rooftop door, or how carefully he has avoided climbing those stairs. They'll only see the bobcat and the rooftop, the dance and the grin. That's the surface. A wild kitten, a slick pane of glass, a face that looks like it's having the time of its life in the middle of a storm. But if you've ever had an animal wander into your world at exactly the moment you didn't know you needed it, a stray cat on the porch, a dog that chose your yard and never left, a hawk that started perching on the same streetlight every morning, you know there's often something deeper at work. Not magic, necessarily, just the way the natural world sometimes steps into our routines and taps us on the shoulder. That's what this story is really about. Yes, we're going to enjoy the rooftop antics. The little bobcat who seems convinced the glass panels are a stage made just for her. We're going to look closely at that silly smile and talk about what bobcats actually do when they stretch their jaws, how their bodies are built for cliffs and canyons, not for slick human roofs. but we're also going to slow down enough to see the man downstairs. To understand what this rooftop meant before Poppy ever set paw on it, and why that security camera was even there in the first place. As we follow this rescued bobcat kitten from the stormy night on the roof to the day her video starts traveling across the internet, I'd invite you to watch with more than just your eyes. Let yourself notice what stirs in your chest when you see her stomp and tilt her head. Think of the last time something small and unexpected broke through your own routine. A bird at the feeder, a fox at the tree line, a memory you didn't plan to revisit. Because to understand why this rooftop became her stage, we first need to step inside the house beneath it and meet the quiet man who thought that part of his life was over. In the next part, we'll walk into Caleb's world on a clear, ordinary morning and see what that greenhouse once held before the bobcat ever smiled into the camera. Most people who watched the rooftop bobcat video never saw the morning light in that house. They never saw how quiet it was before the laughter. Most days start the same way for Caleb. The coffee maker hums in the corner. The radio flicks on to the same soft voice station he's been listening to for years. Outside, northern Arizona is waking up. Birds in the pines, a truck starting up 2 houses down. But inside, the sound that's missing is the one he notices most. No second mug is being pulled from the cabinet. No footsteps on the stairs above the kitchen. No voice calling down, "Did you water the greenhouse or did you forget again?" If you walked in without knowing anything, you might think the place is simply neat. Counters wiped. Tools hung in order along the wall of his workshop downstairs. A pair of boots lined up by the door. But if you look just a little closer, you notice the stillness weighs it, like a room that hasn't quite exhaled in a long time. The greenhouse on the rooftop sits right above all of this. From the street, it looks like a small glass box set back from the edge of the building. Years ago, when money was tight and time was even tighter, Lena had convinced him to build it anyway. "We don't need a big yard," she'd said. "Just a little sky." Back then, you would have seen the windows fogged with life. Tomatoes twisting up twine, herbs spilling over the sides of old wooden crates, little handwritten labels stuck in the soil. On some evenings, when the sun angled just right, the whole thing glowed like a lantern you could see from the highway. Now, the glass is filmed with dust and old rain. Inside, rows of empty planters wait in a kind of quiet that feels less like rest and more like a held breath. At the far end, there's one lonely plant still there, long gone, stems dry, roots clinging to a cracked ceramic mug with Lena's favorite pattern on it. Caleb hasn't opened that greenhouse door since the winter the mountain road took her. He tells himself there's no reason to go up. He can grow herbs on the kitchen sill if he wants them. He can buy tomatoes at the store. The truth is simpler and harder. He's afraid of what will happen to him if he steps into that space and finds it unchanged, as time stopped on the day she left. So he creates new rituals on the lower floors. He sharpens his pencils before every job, even if the old ones still have a good point. He wipes the workbench at the end of each night, lining up his carpenter square and tape measure exactly parallel. He checks the security monitor for the rooftop out of habit, not to see anything in particular, just to confirm that the world above his head is still as empty as he feels. You might recognize some of this in your own life, the way small routines grow around a loss, not to erase it, but to make it livable. The mug you don't move, the chair no one sits in, the drawer full of letters or recipes or dog tags you open only when the day has already been heavy. For Caleb, the greenhouse is that whole drawer sitting over his head. Now and then, he thinks about dismantling it, selling the glass, reclaiming the rooftop. He imagines himself up there with a pry bar, sun on his neck, undoing all the work he did for her. But every time, the thought makes his throat tighten. Removing it would be like saying those evenings under the grow lights never mattered. So he does nothing. He moves around it. He works, eats, sleeps, checks the weather, nods hello to the neighbor, and sidesteps that door at the top of the stairs like it's an edge he can't go over. Marjorie, who lives 2 houses down, sees more than he thinks she does. She shows up every so often with extra bread or a pot of soup, saying things like, "Made too much again?" She doesn't mention the greenhouse. She doesn't mention the accident on Cedar Pass Road. She just puts the food down asks about his latest project, and lets the silence sit with both of them for a few beats before she heads back out into the chill. When she goes, he watches from the window as she walks past the building and glances up once at the rooftop. It's a small thing, barely a tilt of her head. It tells you that even from the outside, people can feel when a house has a room no one wants to enter. What makes the bobcat story so surprising when it finally crashes into his life is how completely it lands on the one place that hasn't moved in years. Out of all the roofs in town, that wild bobcat kitten chooses the greenhouse glass for her stage. Out of all the angles of that house, the security camera captures her dance right above Lena's dead plant in that chipped mug. We'll see that soon enough. For now, it helps to hold this picture in your mind. A man's ordinary morning, a quiet house, a greenhouse full of old soil and dust, and a door he hasn't opened since the world turned upside down on a mountain road. If you've got a door like that in your own life, a room, a box, a song you skip every time it comes on, you're not alone. You don't have to force it open today. Sometimes, something unexpected knocks from the other side first. In the next part, that knock arrives in the middle of a storm. Small paws on glass, a rooftop suddenly alive, and a bobcat kitten whose silly smile will do more than make strangers laugh. It will give Caleb a reason to climb those stairs again. Stay with him as the weather turns, and the rooftop that was once a graveyard of memories becomes the first place where something new happens. The second time the storm rolled over the mountain that week, Caleb almost ignored the sound. Rain on the roof, wind in the trees, the familiar creak in the rafters. It all blended into the kind of background noise you live with in a small town. But then the tablet on his counter lit up, with that soft, insistent glow. Motion detected, rooftop camera. For a moment he just stood there, dish towel in his hands, listening to his own heart more than the weather. The last time the alert had gone off, it was nothing but a loose branch skittering across the glass of the old greenhouse. He had watched it, then gone back to his coffee, relieved to see the roof and the memories under it, undisturbed. Tonight felt different. Maybe it was the edge in the wind. Maybe it was the way February storms echo in a house that's too quiet. He tapped the screen. On the monitor, the rooftop came into view, washed in grainy gray. Rain slid in thin rivers across the panels of the greenhouse, and right in the center of it all, a small shape was struggling to stay upright. You could see, even through the distortion, that it wasn't a house cat. The legs were longer. The body was compact, powerful, in a way domestic kittens rarely are. Ears too big for her head, rounded at the tips. The short tail flicked, ringed with darker bands. One back leg lagged behind the others just a little. She slipped, scrambled. Tiny paws searched for friction on slick glass that had never been meant for paws at all. Caleb felt that old carpenter's instinct kick in. Something is wrong, and something needs fixing. But this wasn't a broken hinge or a warped board. This was a bobcat kitten, alone on a rooftop in a storm. He did what a lot of people wouldn't think to do in the moment. He reached for the phone before the jacket. The local wildlife rehabilitation center answered on the third ring. A calm voice on the other end introduced herself as Dr. Rivera. He explained what he was seeing on his security feed. The bobcat, the limp, the greenhouse roof, trying to keep his voice even. She listened, then spoke in simple, steady sentences. Don't try to pick her up. Don't corner her. If you can, give her a safe way off the glass. Use wood, not metal. Make it wide and low. And then, step back. Let her choose. It was such a different way of helping than he was used to. In his work, you fix things by getting close, by putting your hands on the problem. With wildlife, the most respectful kind of rescue sometimes means staying out of the frame. He ended the call, pulled on his coat, and started up the narrow stairs. The rooftop door at the top was the same one he hadn't opened since the winter of the accident. His hand rested on the knob for a long breath. The storm pressed against the building, urging him forward. Somewhere above his head, small claws scraped glass. When he finally pushed the door open, The smell of wet metal and old soil hit him at once. He stepped into the greenhouse first, because there was no other way out. Thin light filtered through the dirty panels, the empty planters lined up like a row of unsent letters. In the corner, the dead plant in Lena's mug leaned to one side, brittle and brown, as if it had been listening for footsteps that never came. He didn't linger. Not yet. Beyond the greenhouse door, the rooftop opened out. Rain blew sideways. The bobcat kitten froze when he appeared, body low, ears flattened, eyes catching every flicker of movement. She was even smaller in real life than on the screen. Her fur clumped from the rain, making her look half-grown, half-myth. One hind leg hovered just a bit higher, guarding the sawplace. "Easy," he said, more to himself than to her. Instead of walking straight toward her, he moved sideways to the stack of old boards he kept near the vent. His hands knew what to do, even if his mind was still trying to catch up. He chose 2 sturdy pieces, laid them from the edge of the greenhouse frame down to the rougher surface of the main roof. The boards made a gentle ramp, a path from slippery glass to safety. Every nail hole, every knot in the wood felt like its own small promise. There is a way out of this. The kitten watched, muscles coiled. When he took one step too close, she let out a low, startled sound. Not quite a growl, not quite a cry. Whatever it was, it made him stop in his tracks. He remembered Dr. Rivera's words. Step back. So he did. He backed up until his shoulders met the cold brick of the stairwell wall. Then he lowered himself to a crouch, keeping his gaze soft and his profile turned. Not a threat, not a rescuer looming over her, just another animal on the roof, giving her space. Slowly, she tested the ramp. One paw, then another. The claws that had been skittering helplessly on glass now hooked into the grain of the wood, finding anchors where none had been moments before. She moved in a careful, 3-legged rhythm, protecting the sore limb. When she reached the top of the ramp, she paused and glanced back toward him. For the briefest second, that same odd expression crossed her face. Jaw stretching, lips pulled back, teeth flashing in something that looked a lot like a crooked smile. Downstairs, later, people would laugh at that face. Up here, in the rain, it felt like a strange little acknowledgement. I see you. I'm not tame, but I see you. Once she reached the safer part of the roof, she disappeared around a vent pipe, out of his line of sight, but still inside the camera's field. He listened until the sound of claws faded, replaced again by rain. Back inside, he called the rehab center again, gave an update, and listened as Dr. Rivera suggested leaving out a small portion of proper food and a shallow bowl of water at the same spot each morning. Not to invite dependency, just to support her while they figured out the next step. That suggestion became the start of their first ritual. At dawn, he would carry a bowl up the greenhouse stairs, pausing a little less each time he passed Lena's old plant. He'd step out onto the rooftop, place the food near the ramp, then retreat to a respectful distance. The bobcat, he didn't have a name for her yet, would appear when she was ready, tail twitching, ears flicking, reading his body language just as carefully as he was learning to read hers. If you've ever set out a dish of water for a stray animal on your porch, you know that feeling. You're not trying to own anything, you're just saying, if you need a safe place for a moment, this corner is yours. These first rescues and rituals didn't look dramatic from the outside. A few pieces of wood, a couple of phone calls. One man was climbing a set of stairs he'd been avoiding for years. One wild bobcat kitten learning that a human can build a path without crossing a line. What makes them matter is what they set in motion. Because once the storm passes and the ramp stays, that glass rooftop doesn't go back to being empty. It becomes something else in her eyes. A place to play, to stomp, to strut. A stage. In the next part, we'll watch how this tiny stranger turns those boards and that greenhouse into her own rooftop theater, and how her silly smile, caught on camera, starts to ripple far beyond this one quiet house. As you listen, you might keep an eye on the small routines in your own life, and how they sometimes open doors you thought would stay shut forever. By the time the storm fronts finally moved on, The rooftop had started to feel different. What used to be a dead gray square above Caleb's head was now a place he checked without thinking, like glancing at a favorite window. The ramp stayed where he'd laid it. The greenhouse glass still held its film of dust, but almost every day now, some part of that roof belonged to a tiny wild visitor who seemed convinced it was built just for her. The first time he saw her play rather than struggle, it caught him off guard. It was early, that soft hour when the sky over northern Arizona is more silver than blue. He stepped out to set the food and water where Dr. Rivera had suggested, then retreated toward the stairwell. The boards creaked under his boots. He waited, hands in his pockets, trying not to stare. At first, nothing. Just the wind brushing past the chimney. Then, as if she'd been waiting for him to get the distance right, the little bobcat kitten slipped into view from behind a vent pipe. She moved with that cautious three-legged gait, still favoring the sore hind leg. She drank, ate a little, checked the air. By all rights, that could have been the whole scene. Instead, when she finished, she padded back toward the glass. You could see the change in her body language. Tail up, shoulders loose, she hopped onto the greenhouse roof like a performer stepping under lights. One paw, then another, testing the slick surface that had nearly trapped her before. The sound came first, claws tapping a playful rhythm on the panels. Then came the move that would eventually make her famous. She stopped in the center, lifted her head toward the security camera, and stomped both front paws at once. It looked, on screen, like a child insisting on attention. Then she stretched her jaw wide, lips pulled back, teeth bared in what, to anyone who doesn't know bobcats, looked exactly like a grin. In reality, she was probably scenting the air, loosening the tension in her face, doing something that made perfect sense in bobcat language. But on that little monitor in Caleb's kitchen, it was pure mischief. A rescued bobcat kitten, safe for the moment, was acting like the rooftop was her own private stage. Day after day, a pattern formed. She'd appear not just to eat, but to rehearse. Tiny sideways hops, quick spins, a pounce at some invisible thing on the glass. Sometimes, she'd press her paws down and peer through into the greenhouse below, as if watching the shadows of empty pots and that one old mug. Between movements, that crooked smile would flash again and again, more habit than joke, but impossible to see without feeling something lift in your chest. One afternoon, the light slanting in just right, Caleb hit the record button. He didn't tell himself why. Maybe he wanted proof that it wasn't his imagination, that this wild animal really was using his roof like a stage. Maybe some part of him wanted to show someone else what was happening above the dust and dead leaves. The clip he saved was short. The bobcat, by then he'd started calling her Poppy for the way she popped in and out of frame, trotted onto the glass, stomped, glanced up, and gave that ridiculous smile. Then she batted at a drip of water running down the pane, lost her footing, recovered with a little shake, and strutted off as if nothing had happened. He showed it to Marjorie the next day when she brought over a pot of stew. She stood at the counter, wooden spoon still in hand, watching the tiny rooftop theater on his tablet. When Poppy did her double paw stomp and flashed her silly face, Marjorie laughed. A real laugh. The kind that rises before you can decide if it's appropriate. "Oh, she knows she's being watched," she said, wiping at the corner of her eye. Caleb found himself smiling too. Not the polite curve he'd practiced for months, but something looser. "She thinks that roof is a stage," he replied, half amused, half bewildered. With his permission, Marjorie took the clip to a friend who knew how to share things online. They kept it simple. No dramatic music, no shouting text, just a line that gently dared people not to laugh at the way this rescued bobcat kitten seemed to mug for the camera on her glass rooftop. From there, the story started to live a parallel life. On phones and tablets far from that quiet Arizona street, people watched Poppy stomp on the glass and flash that odd little smile. Some were in cities, some in farmhouses, some in hospital rooms or break rooms or parked cars on lunch breaks. A few replayed the clip with the sound up, listening to the tiny tap, tap, tap of claws on glass and the low hum of wind across the mic. Comments began to appear. floating over the video like notes on a bulletin board. She looks just like my old cat did when she wanted attention. I drive a mountain road every day. Never thought about who else might be crossing it. I didn't know bobcats could be this funny. For people who spent a lot of time alone, or who had lost someone and couldn't quite explain why animal videos made them feel steadier, Poppy's silly rooftop routine landed in a tender place. She was wild, clearly not a house pet, but there was something deeply familiar in the way she seemed to demand to be seen. Downstairs, late at night, Caleb scrolled through those messages, with a mug of tea cooling at his elbow. The house didn't feel any less empty, exactly, but there was a new thread running through his days now. A sense that what was happening on his roof mattered to people he would never meet. You might know that feeling yourself. The way a short clip of an animal, a fox in the snow, a hummingbird at a feeder, a bobcat kitten on a glass roof, can reach you at the end of a long day and loosen something you didn't realize was tight. What the viewers couldn't see inside that viral moment was the next layer. That behind every shared laugh, there was still an injured leg, a wild heart, and a question that needed answering. How long could this rooftop stage be safe for her? And what would it mean for both of them to move beyond the glass? In the next part, we'll see what happens when the Wildlife Center watches that same clip and sees not just a funny smile, but a young bobcat who needs help. As you listen, you might notice which part of you responds more, the one that laughs at her antics, or the one that quietly worries about where the road leads next. The phone rang on a Tuesday afternoon, just as the sun was slipping behind the ridge, and the rooftop camera captured another one of Poppy's little performances. On the screen, she was in full form, that rescued bobcat kitten bouncing onto the glass, giving her double paw stomp, then tilting her head toward the lens with that silly smile people all over the country were starting to recognize. For a moment, Caleb considered letting the call go to voicemail. It was easy to imagine it was just another robocall, some distant script that had nothing to do with this small, wild life on his roof. But something in the timing made him reach for the receiver anyway. Hello? Mr. Harris, this is Dr. Rivera from the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center. I think I've been watching your rooftop. Her voice was warm, steady. You could hear wind on her end, too, the kind that means open land, not a city street. She explained that someone had forwarded the video. They'd watched it, not just for the humor, but for the details most viewers didn't notice. The limp, she said. The way she's holding that back leg. And the fact that she's getting a little too comfortable up there. Caleb glanced at the monitor. Poppy was now crouched, staring down through the greenhouse glass, as if she could see into the memory-locked room below. So she is a bobcat? He asked, though he already knew. Looks like a young female. She's beautiful. But she can't stay on that rooftop forever, for her sake and yours. There was no judgment in her tone, just a gentle firmness. She talked him through what they'd be able to do at the center. A full exam of Poppy's leg, a check on her weight, her teeth, and her overall health. Blood work if needed, a rehabilitation plan, and, if possible, eventual release back into wild country where glass roofs and traffic sounds don't exist. Then she added the part that made his stomach tighten. To do that, we'd need you to bring her in. We're just over the pass off Cedar Ridge Road. Silence stretched between them. Cedar Ridge Road. Locals still called it the Pass, the way you call something by a nickname to avoid saying the real name out loud. It was the narrow mountain road that wound up beyond town, the same road where Lena's car had slid out on black ice and never made it home. He hadn't driven it since. Is there another way? He asked, already knowing the answer. Not one that makes sense for her, Dr. Rivera said gently. We can lend you an appropriate crate, walk you through how to coax her in safely. We'll be waiting on the other side. But we can't treat her through a camera, Caleb. He stood there with the phone pressed to his ear, eyes fixed on the tiny figure on the screen. Poppy prancing along the edge of the glass, tail flicking, that uneven rhythm in her step. The rooftop had become her stage, but it was also a ledge. One bad slip, one startled jump in the wrong direction, and the story could end differently. He thought about the nights he'd stood at this counter watching her. The way that Bobcat smile had started to loosen something in his chest. The way people online had written things like, "She made my whole day," and "I didn't know wild animals could seem so happy." He also thought about how many times he'd added an hour to his drives just to avoid that mountain pass. The long detours, the pulled-over moments on the shoulder when a certain song came on the radio, and he couldn't listen without seeing flashing lights in the rearview mirror of his memory. "Can I call you back?" he asked quietly. "Of course," she said. "Take a little time, but don't take too long. Limp or not, young bobcats are curious. Rooftops and roads aren't built for them." After he hung up, the house felt smaller. He moved through the motions, rinsing a plate, folding a towel, but he kept coming back to the same picture. Poppy in a crate in the bed of his truck, the road curving up the mountain. The spot where the guardrail still held a faint scar of paint. The idea of driving that stretch made his throat dry. The idea of leaving her on the rooftop, limping and growing bolder by the day, made his stomach twist. That evening, Marjorie knocked on the door with a casserole she just happened to have made too much of. She took one look at his face and didn't bother with small talk. "Bad news?" "Not exactly," he said, and told her about the call. She listened, hands wrapped around her own elbows, as he described Cedar Ridge Road, how he hadn't gone near it since the crash. He didn't have to say whose crash. Around here, people remember those things. "You always did take the long way," she said softly. Then, after a moment, "Maybe this time, the road's not just about what you lost. Maybe it's about who you can help." It was a simple line, but it landed in a place he'd been carefully ignoring. The idea that this wasn't just a painful route, it was a path Poppy needed him to take. The bobcat kitten on his roof couldn't get herself to the rehab center. Her world was claw marks on glass and the edge of the building. His world was larger, even if it had felt small since Lena's accident. Later that night, he called the center back. He asked more questions this time. How do you move a bobcat without domesticating her? What kind of crate is safe? How do you minimize stress? Dr. Rivera walked him through every step, using food as a gentle lure, never hands, placing a towel over the crate to keep things dark and quiet, keeping the ride as smooth and steady as possible. She also shared something else. They'd been tracking wildlife injuries on Cedar Ridge Road for years. Deer, foxes, a couple of adult bobcats. It wasn't just his story that lived on that asphalt. It was a pattern. "We're working with the county on better signage," she said. "Reflectors, maybe a reduced speed zone near certain curves. Your little rooftop star might help people see the animals out there in a different light." It was the first time he'd thought of his trip over the pass as part of something bigger than his own grief. You might have a road like that in your own life, a route you won't drive, a town you won't visit, a song you shut off halfway through. Sometimes avoiding it feels like the only way to breathe. And sometimes, quietly, a reason appears to face it again, not to erase the past, but to carry someone else forward. The next morning, Caleb borrowed the crate, laid an old towel inside, and set it near the ramp on the roof. Poppy watched from the shadows, suspicious but intrigued. The stage, she'd claimed, was changing shape, turning from a playground into a doorway. He stood there with his truck keys in one hand, the other resting lightly on the crate, feeling the old fear and the new responsibility tug in opposite directions. In the next part, we'll ride with him as he finally turns onto Cedar Ridge Road, with Poppy in the back, mountains ahead, and every curve holding both a memory and a chance for something different. As you listen, you might notice what roads you've been circling, and what or who might be worth facing them for when the time comes. They left town before most people had finished their first cup of coffee. The sky over northern Arizona was that pale, tentative blue that comes right before the sun climbs over the ridgeline. Beth showed in the air when Caleb stepped out to the truck, crate in his arms. Inside the crate, the little bobcat kitten shifted once, claws clicking softly against the plastic floor. then settled again. Poppy wasn't dancing on a glass rooftop this morning. Her stage, for now, was a travel crate lined with an old towel and a piece of cardboard that smelled like the workshop. The ramp, the greenhouse, the rooftop camera, all of that stayed behind as he set the crate gently in the truck bed and secured it the way Dr. Rivera had taught him. It's funny how different the same road can look depending on what you carry with you. On the mornings when he'd avoided Cedar Pass, he'd pointed the truck in the opposite direction by habit, choosing longer routes that curled away from the mountain. Today, he turned the key, watched his knuckles go white on the steering wheel for a second, and then eased out of the driveway toward the highway that led up. The first few miles were familiar town things: a gas station, a closed diner, a school parking lot still empty. The bobcat made a small sound when he hit the first pothole, a curious chirp more than a complaint. He glanced back in the mirror. Through the rear glass, he could see the outline of her ears inside the crate, swiveling like little satellite dishes, catching every new sound. He turned on the radio, low. An old song came on. One of the ones Lena used to hum when they drove this way together to look at the view. For a moment, his throat tightened. His hand hovered over the dial, ready to switch it off. He didn't. He just reached over and nudged the volume down until it was barely more than a suggestion in the background. Like a memory that doesn't demand attention, but refuses to be erased. As the road began to climb, the landscape changed. Houses gave way to patchy grass and scrub, then to stands of pine and rock cuts where the hillside had been carved away to make room for asphalt. The curves started to stack up. Signs warned of falling rocks, sudden turns, and winter ice. This was Cedar Pass. If you've ever driven a mountain road in the American West, you know this kind of stretch. Beautiful and unsettling at the same time. No shoulders to speak of, just a white line separating you from a steep drop on one side and a wall of rock on the other. The kind of place where you keep both hands on the wheel even if you've driven it 100 times. Caleb hadn't driven it once since the crash. The first tight curve brought with it a rush of memory. Wipers fighting snow, taillights ahead. That sickening moment when you realize the tires are no longer gripping anything solid. He felt his foot lighten on the gas without thinking, the truck easing back from 40 to 35, then to 30. In the crate behind him, Poppy shifted again. Not frantic, just present. Her world was simpler. The vibration of the road, the smell of pine pushing in through the vents, the steady rhythm of the engine. She didn't know this was that road. She only knew they were moving forward. Sometimes, that's what courage looks like. Not a dramatic charge, just a body that stays put when every old fear says, turn around. Halfway up the pass, he pulled into a tiny turnout that overlooked the valley. It was the same spot where he'd stood with a state trooper years before, watching flares burn on the ice. The guardrail still carried a faint smear of paint from Lena's car, long since sanded and weathered by sun and snow, but still there if you knew where to look. He put the truck in park. His hands were shaking. For a long moment, he didn't get out. He just sat there, listening. He heard the tick of the cooling engine, the faint rush of wind through the pines, and from behind him, a soft, questioning chirp. That bobcat kitten sound Poppy made when something changed, and she wanted to understand it. He took that as his cue. Stepping out into the cold, he walked to the guardrail, laid his hand on the metal, fingers spread, the way you might touch a gravestone or an old photograph. Not a big speech, not a grand moment, just contact. A quiet acknowledgement. This is where my life split into before and after. He didn't talk out loud, but somewhere between the ache in his chest and the clean air filling his lungs, something like a thank you floated up. Not to the road, not even to Lena exactly, just to the fact that he was still here, able to stand, with a small wildlife depending on him to keep going. From the truck bed, a tiny paw thumped once against the crate wall. He turned. Poppy's eyes were visible through the small front grate, bright and steady. She blinked slowly in that cat-like way that sometimes feels like trust. "All right," he said, more to himself than to her. Let's get you where you need to go. Back on the road, he drove differently than he had in those younger, faster years. He hugged the inside of the curves, checked his mirrors for oncoming trucks, and let anyone in a hurry pass him at the wider spots. If another driver was impatient behind him, he pulled over and waved them around. Part of that was for Poppy. A calm, steady ride is easier on a rescued bobcat kitten in a crate. Part of it was for every animal that might be just out of sight near the guardrails. Deer, coyotes, foxes. Once you thought about them, it's hard to go back to pretending that these roads belong to cars alone. Maybe you've noticed that in your own drives. The first time you see a deer at the edge of your headlights, or a raccoon crossing in the rear view, something shifts. The road stops being just a strip of blacktop between point A and point B. It becomes a shared space, a place where human plans and animal routes overlap in ways that can be dangerous, but can also be handled with care. By the time Caleb crested the pass and started down the other side, his grip on the wheel had loosened a little. The fear was still there, he wouldn't pretend otherwise, but it was now riding alongside something else. The sense that this trip wasn't only about revisiting pain, it was about changing what this road could mean, for him and for the wild neighbors who had been crossing it long before there was pavement. At the base of the pass, a small sign pointed toward the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center. He put on his turn signal, heart picking up again. But in a different way now. Each mile from here on out was a step closer to help for Poppy, and to people who spent their days making sure animals like her had a chance beyond a brief, viral video. In the next part, we'll step into that world. The exam room. The staff who know bobcat behavior by heart. And the moment when this silly, smiling rooftop kitten becomes the face of something much bigger. A safer future for animals and drivers on roads just like Cedar Pass. As you listen, you might think about your own regular routes and what small changes you could make. A slower speed, a second glance at the shoulder, to share them more gently with the lives moving alongside you. The rehab center sat at the end of a gravel drive, tucked into a stand of pines that softened the sound of the highway. When Caleb turned in, it felt a little like crossing an invisible line between two worlds. The one where a rescued bobcat kitten danced on a rooftop, and the one where people quietly spent their days putting wild things back together. He parked, cut the engine, and sat for a moment with his hands on the wheel. From the bed of the truck came a soft scrape of claws against plastic. Poppy was awake, listening. He stepped out, walked around, and laid his palm on the crate, the way you might rest a hand on a dog's shoulder before a vet visit. No words, just contact. The staff met him outside. They moved with a calm efficiency that came from repetition, not rushed, not casual. One tech checked the crate latches. Another draped a light towel over the top to dim the view. Dr. Rivera greeted him with a nod that carried both gratitude and reassurance. "You got her here," she said. "That's the hard part." Inside the exam room was simple. Stainless steel table, cabinets, a scale on the floor. It could have been any small-town vet clinic, except for the posters on the wall, silhouettes of local wildlife, diagrams of wings and paws and tracks instead of dog breeds. They didn't drag Poppy out into the open. They eased the crate door against the table, coaxed her forward with patience, and did as little handling as possible. Even through his worry, Caleb noticed how carefully they guarded her wildness. Up close, you could see what the rooftop camera never could. Her coat was a little dull from the winter. Her ribs showed just enough to mark a lean season. That back leg, the one that had slipped on the glass, trembled when she shifted weight. But her eyes were bright, clear, and fierce. She hissed once, more fear than aggression, then settled into a tense crouch as gloved hands worked gently around her. "Old sprain," Dr. Rivera murmured, feeling along the limb. "Healing on its own, but she's been compensating. We'll help her build that strength back up." They weighed her, checked her teeth, listened to her heart, drew a bit of blood. Each step came with a brief explanation, not just for Caleb, but for anyone who might someday wonder what happens to a bobcat kitten after the viral moment passes. Between tasks, the vet talked in plain language about boundaries. "She's not a pet," she said quietly, as Poppy flashed that familiar jaw stretch that had looked so much like a grin on his rooftop. She doesn't need or want us to treat her like a house cat. What she needs is space, food, medical care, and the chance to make choices inside safe limits. Caleb nodded. He found himself relieved to hear it said out loud. He'd always kept a respectful distance on the roof, but the online comments had painted a different fantasy. Jokes about bringing her inside, questions about whether he'd tried to pet her. Hearing a professional confirm his instincts steadied something in him. After the exam, they led him down a hallway lined with whiteboards and clipboards. On one wall, a simple chart caught his eye. Hand-drawn stretches of Cedar Pass Road, marked with dates and small notes. Deer, mile 3.2, leg fracture. Gray fox, mile 4.7, DOA. Adult bobcat, curve at overlook. Poppy's case was about to become another entry. We've been tracking incidents on that pass for years, Dr. Rivera explained. Too many animals crossing, too many cars moving just a little too fast for the conditions. Your girl here, well, her rooftop routine gave us something we haven't had before, a face for the issue. It sounded strange at first, using a bobcat kitten with a silly smile as a symbol for a serious problem. But as she spoke, the pieces lined up. The video that had made people laugh was already in circulation. Folks from all over had watched that rooftop and fallen for the kitten prancing across the glass. What if, instead of letting that moment be nothing more than a bit of comfort scrolling, they used it to nudge the county and the community toward change? Not a campaign full of fear. Something quieter. A short piece from the center showing Poppy in a proper enclosure, her leg healing, with a gentle reminder that the same mountains that make Cedar Pass beautiful are home to elk, deer, bobcats, and more. A reminder that slowing down on those curves isn't just about avoiding a ticket. It's about lives, human and wild. People care more when they can picture someone, Dr. Rivera said, even if that someone is a bobcat on a rooftop. Over the next weeks, with Caleb's blessing, the center began weaving Poppy's story into their outreach. They shared updates, a photo of her testing a climbing log, a glimpse of her watching snow through the safety of a wire instead of from a glass edge. They paired those images with simple suggestions, reflective markers the county could install, lower recommended speeds on certain turns, and ways residents could report injured wildlife without putting themselves at risk. The online community responded in its own quiet way. Under new clips, people wrote about roads in their own states where animals appeared at the edges of headlights. Some admitted they'd never thought much about those moments beyond a quick scare. Others talked about changing the way they drove at dawn and dusk. A few even sent small donations to the center, noting that they'd come for the smiling rooftop bobcat and stayed for the education. Through it all, Poppy stayed a bobcat. She wasn't paraded around like a mascot. Most days, she saw only staff and volunteers. When school groups or local families came, they watched from a respectful distance, while a ranger used her story as a starting point to talk about bobcat behavior, habitat, and the responsibilities that come with living in mountain country. Caleb visited on a schedule that suited both of them. Sometimes he sat on a bench near her enclosure, hands folded, watching the way she moved now. Stronger, more sure-footed, still full of that same contained energy. Every once in a while, she'd turn and, in just the right light, flash that familiar smile toward the fence, as if the rooftop stage lived on in her muscle memory. Those moments didn't feel like an encore so much as a reminder. The story that began on the glass had rooted itself in places he couldn't have predicted. In county meetings, in drivers' habits on Cedar Pass, in his own understanding of what it meant to share the landscape with wild neighbors. You might think of the animals near your own roads, the deer at the edge of the cornfield, the hawk on the light pole, the fox that crosses near the creek. It doesn't take a viral video to make their lives matter. Sometimes, it just takes one person deciding to pay attention, and then speaking up. In the next part, we'll step forward in time a little, into a softer chapter, where Poppy's life at the center and Caleb's life back under that rooftop greenhouse start to settle into something steady. The rooftop stage will be quieter, but the echoes of those little claws on glass will keep shaping how he moves through the world. And how others do, too. On some evenings now, when the light over northern Arizona turns that soft gold, you can stand on the street below Caleb's building and see something that would have been hard to imagine a year before. The greenhouse on his rooftop glowing gently, like a lantern someone finally remembered to switch back on. Inside, it's not crowded the way it once was. Just a few sturdy plants in clean pots. Some are herbs, some are native flowers that do well in thin mountain air. On the far shelf sits Lena's old mug, no longer holding a dead stem, but a small bobcat-colored succulent with soft gray leaves. The room doesn't feel frozen anymore. It feels lived in. Most mornings, Caleb climbs those stairs without that old catch in his chest. He opens the greenhouse door, lets the air move through, waters the soil, and listens to the quiet. Not the heavy quiet of grief, but the ordinary quiet of a house at peace. The security camera is still up there, still watching the roofline. But its feed is mostly uneventful now. A passing raven, a light dusting of snow, the shadow of a cloud. Every once in a while, out of habit, he scrolls back to that first clip of a rescued bobcat kitten slipping and stomping on the glass. Poppy's little rooftop stage moment, the silly smile that made strangers try not to laugh, is still there, pixelated and perfect. It lives in his saved files and out in the wider world, where people share it on slow days when they need something gentler than the news. Down the mountain, at the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center, Poppy's life has taken on its own steady rhythm. She's no longer the tiny limping bobcat kitten who almost slid off a glass roof. She's lean and strong now, moving through her enclosure with the kind of balance she was built for. Climbing, stretching, pausing on high perches to survey everything. The injury in her leg is a memory in her muscles, not a limit. Visitors don't crowd her. They stand a respectful distance away, listening as a ranger explains how bobcats live, how they move through the same hills where people hike and drive, how a moment of care on a mountain road can make all the difference. On one sign outside her enclosure, there's a simple drawing of a rooftop greenhouse and a tiny figure on the glass. The caption tells a short version of the story. A wild kitten in trouble, a careful rescue, a community that chose to slow down on Cedar Pass Road. When school groups come through, kids point at the drawing, then look up at the real bobcat with wide eyes. Older visitors sometimes stay a little longer, taking in the details, nodding at things the ranger says about sharing land with wildlife. Once in a while, when the timing is just right, Caleb is sitting on a bench nearby. He doesn't need to be there for Poppy to be okay. The staff have that covered. He comes because it feels right to check in, to witness. On good days, she ignores him completely, as she should. On others, she might glance his way and stretch her jaw in that same odd expression that the internet once decided was a grin. He smiles back, not needing her to be anything other than what she is. A bobcat, doing bobcat things, in a place built for her kind of life. Back home, the house that once felt too quiet has a few new sounds. The kettle whistles more because there are more evenings when he's up late reading messages from people who still stumble across the rooftop video. Some write about the cedar-lined mountain road they drive to work, promising themselves they'll ease off the gas near the curves. Some talk about losses of their own, partners, parents, old dogs, and how watching a silly bobcat kitten on a rooftop helped them breathe a little easier on a hard day. Marjorie still brings soup sometimes. She also brings flyers from the center now, updates on new rescues, notes about volunteer days. Caleb has found a place there too, in his own way. He spends a few afternoons each month fixing enclosures, sanding down rough edges on perches, and building small wooden platforms that will never mean anything to people online, but will matter to the paws and claws that use them. The greenhouse and the rehab center have become two ends of the same small bridge in his life. One is where he remembers the past, with more tenderness than pain. The other is where he keeps his hands busy, building a kinder present for creatures who will never know his story. Somewhere between those places, Cedar Pass Road has changed a bit as well. There are new reflective markers at the worst curves now, additional wildlife crossing signs. Some drivers complain about reduced speeds. Others, especially folks who know what it's like to get that middle-of-the-night phone call, nod and ease off the accelerator. Poppy will never understand that her goofy rooftop smile helped push any of that along. She doesn't need to, but the effect is still real, written into the lives of deer and foxes and other bobcats that cross that asphalt under moonlight. If you've stayed with this story all the way here, you might feel a mix of things. Warmth when you picture that rescued bobcat kitten on the glass roof. A pull in your chest when you think about the road Caleb had to drive. Maybe a quiet ache for your own rooftop greenhouse. Whatever room or memory you've been keeping closed. Before we say goodbye, I gently invite you to turn this all inward for a moment. Is there a stage in your life that's been empty for too long? A hobby, a room, a walk, a stretch of road you've avoided because it carries too much history. Maybe you're not ready to fling the doors open. That's okay. But perhaps there's one small, poppy-sized step you can take. A phone call, a slow drive, a plant repotted, a tiny bit of space cleared for something living to grow again. If this bobcat story gave you even a little comfort, or helped you feel more connected to nature, to wild animals, or to your own heart, it would mean a lot if you'd tap like and consider subscribing so you don't miss the next quiet story we share from these mountains and beyond. And if you feel moved to go a little further, you can use Super Thanks or check the links we've shared to support the people and places that rescue and heal wild animals like bobcats every single day. Even a small gift becomes part of a ramp, a safe crate, a warm enclosure. Together, we can keep building those hidden paths that carry frightened, limping lives off the glass and into a future where they can climb, run, and simply be wild again.